Is on. You should be able to see it. Morgan gets an A for the day, just for that good comment. Lily, come on now. That's your kind of job. You need to remember for next time.
I will.
All right. So it's been kind of a crazy week, I expect. It's certainly been crazy for me, and I sort of know what I'm doing. What I suspect is that over the next week or two, you're going to figure out the rhythm for each of your courses, and so it's going to make more sense than it does right now. Hey, Kevin, thanks for joining us. Okay, if it feels a little crazy right now, that's normal for this kind of a situation. Not that we've ever been in this kind of a situation before. Okay. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was something that Pam brought up in her module analysis, because Pam is really good at asking the tough questions. I think it comes from the fact that she's spending her own money or something. That, you know, she's the one who always says the emperor has no clothes on. Okay, so what she said is, and I'm paraphrasing here, she was much more diplomatic. Where the heck are we on the course schedule? Okay, and do we really have to read all of this stuff to get to the end of the semester? Okay, so I wanted to address that first, even though it's the second thing logically in order what we're going to do. All right, so let's jump over to the course outline page. I'm going to share my screen. At least that is the plan. If I can find, here we go. Excuse me. All right, share and course outline. All right, hopefully you can see the course outline, and this is not the first time you've ever looked at it. Okay, a couple of things. One, today we're going to finish up talking about production and cost. I noticed that some of you have not yet done the module quiz, which means in my mind you're behind. You don't want to fall too behind, so please try to get caught up as soon as you can. I've also found that there are a couple of students who have not logged into Canvas since February. None of them is here. None of them is here, except maybe, who do I want to pick on? Emily. Yeah, Emily could be one of them. Kidding. Come on, Emily.
No way. That's not true at all.
I know. I shouldn't pick on you because you're not with your other half today. Okay.
Now, Dr. Greenlaw, we had talked about module 6.1 and I had sent some other questions.
Yes, you did. And I'm not, I haven't done with,
yeah, I just wanted to say that's why I haven't taken the quiz.
Yes. Okay. You guys, come on, you guys are all the good kids. You're here. So you're not the ones that I'm really speaking to. Hey, Celine, I'm glad you made it.
Hi, how are you?
I've been better, but we're going to pretend that everything is cool.
Okay.
That makes sense? Wow, look at all those degrees you have behind you.
Oh, they're not mine.
You must be really smart.
Finally.
Okay. All right. Okay, now, so the first thing is I am not, wedded is the word that comes to mind. We're going to work through the content as at our own pace. That is, at my own pace. You can't just quit and say, I'm done, okay? If we don't get to the end, if we don't get to international trade, that's okay, okay? If we don't get to pollution and environmental problems, unless you're a tree hugger, that's probably okay too. You know, we're going to get through whatever we can get through given the situation that we're in. Okay, and I will count on you experienced online learners to give pep talks to the newbies here. Yes, that means you, Morgan. You know I'm talking about you. Okay, now let's talk about topics 7 and 8. Okay, you're going to want to hear this. Okay, this is the answer to either the questions you've already asked or the questions you would ask when you finally got to topic 7. Okay, there are two ways to talk about theory of the firm. Okay, there is the traditional way where we talk about all the different market structures, and there are 4 of them. If you look at module 8.1, there's perfect competition. Module 8.2, there's monopoly. Module 8.3, monopolistic competition, and also oligopoly. There are these 4 models of the structure of an industry or the structure of a market. Okay, the traditional way to teach this stuff is laid out in the modules. It's first you do it all with perfect competition, then you do it all with monopoly, and by all, what I mean is you're looking at the same issues. So you do the same things 4 times over by the time you get done. Lots of people find that boring and that it takes a lot of time, and I'm certainly one of those people. Okay, the other shortcoming that I see with this traditional approach is it only indirectly talks about what the real world is actually like. Okay, it is almost impossible, just to take an example, to find a firm which is perfectly competitive in the real world. Almost impossible. Okay, monopoly is illegal in the US. Okay, so what we do have is some examples of what are called regulated monopolies, but they operate somewhat differently than the theory of monopoly. Okay, so all of this is prologue. What I want you to learn is everything that's in Greenlaw's lecture notes. That is now a live file. Basically, what I do in there is I look at the behavior of actual firms in the real world. It's a different way of covering almost all the same material that is in topic 8, okay? Except we do it once, and we do it in an order that makes sense to me, okay? So what you need to do is go through Greenlaw's lecture notes. At the near the end, they start to get rough. I haven't had a chance to clean them up. I was going to do that over spring break, but other things happened. Okay. Let me put it another way. I won't test you on anything from module 8.1, 8.2, or 8.3, which is not talked about in the lecture notes. So if you just read the lecture notes, you would be fine. Okay. Any questions about that? Some of you are getting really serious looking all of a sudden. Maggie's good, I can tell. That's her I'm good look.
Wait, are you saying?
Margot is not showing me any body language today. Neither is Christine. I'm sorry, what?
So should we still be reading module 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 and then take the module quizzes as well?
Okay, that's a good question. The short answer is you don't have to, okay? Today, I went through all the quiz questions in module 8.3. And what I will say is the questions for monopolistic competition are pretty good. And the questions for oligopoly are not as good. Okay, so what I would recommend that you do is that you do the self-checks, and I will send you a list of the self-checks, the sections in each of those modules where the self-checks are really good and apply to my lecture notes. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Mac, you made it.
Yeah, I'm here.
How do I know?
Hold on. Hello.
There you are. Okay. Is Sierra alive as far as you know?
I don't know if she's planning on. I've talked to her today, but I don't know if she's planning on getting on here tonight.
Okay, but she is alive.
Yes.
Okay. Please share this stuff with her, okay?
Okay.
And tell her that she's in huge trouble for not coming tonight, but she can make it up 100% if she watches the video.
Okay.
Okay.
I do have a question, just to clarify, 8.1 through 8.3, we don't do the quiz,
Included.
but we do the self-checks.
Yes.
And will there be a quiz on your lecture notes?
No, there isn't, because
It's going to be on the exam.
right.
Okay.
Okay, so use the self-checks in lieu of the module quiz.
Okay.
For those of you who are planning on failing this semester, by next semester, I will have a module quiz for the lecture notes. Okay, but for most of you, that doesn't really help. And I apologize.
Wait, are we supposed to turn in the self-checks to you?
No,
We do.
no. The whole purpose of the self-checks all along is to give you feedback on how well you're learning.
Okay then.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So Pam, are you even working anymore in your office, or are you working from home?
Yes, so my office has moved to my home. As a matter of fact, when I'm done here, I'm going to attempt to go to Walmart and see if I can find an office chair. But yeah, I'll be teleworking.
Yep.
Working on COVID-19.
Yes. Well, this is my office right here. So
Yeah.
my current office. So, all right. So any questions about where we're going? You'll notice that we have 2 more weeks before the next exam. So you have 2 weeks to learn theory of the firm. Don't wait until the last minute, because there is a lot of material in here, okay? So my plan is send me any questions that you have from the lecture notes before next Wednesday's Hangout, so that I know what we can talk about next Wednesday. If you don't get all the way through, just send me the questions that you have to that point.
Okay.
Amanda, does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Kevin?
Yep.
Good. All right. Any other questions before we?
So our next exam is April the 3rd.
It probably is April the 3rd. I have not changed that yet.
Okay. So
If I think we need another couple days, I'm not adverse to pushing it back a little bit, but we'll see.
Okay, but there's also a group project too.
Oh,
April 3rd.
You heard?
No, it's on April. If you go onto the module side,
Yes.
there's a group project for study questions or something that's also due April 3rd.
Okay.
We're not doing that?
Hold on. Group assignments. Ask me again next week. In the meantime, I will fix it. Okay. For those of you from my face-to-face class, what I ask the online students to do is in groups to work through problems like the ones we do on the board in class. And so I will probably come up with some of those problems, which will be good practice for the exams. Okay. But I will try to give you as much advance notice as possible.
Okay.
Other questions?
Nope.
Evie, you're really quiet tonight.
I'm on mute.
Well, yes, I knew that, but that's your choice, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, so let's go back to, okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment. Let's go back to the module analyses that you sent me so that we can talk about the questions that you asked about. Okay, a couple things. One is I didn't get a lot of module analyses. So I guess from that I could infer that you guys have learned it all, but I don't actually believe that. Okay. The module analyses, the things you raised in the module analysis were pretty broad things. Like, I don't understand the cost curves. Okay, that's you know, that's kind of a big deal. So what I want to do is sort of summarize what's in the module and hopefully show you some graphs that will help you learn this stuff. Okay. Somebody's making a lot of noise.
Sorry.
Khalid, is that you?
Yeah.
You're having a party?
No, my sister just came home.
Good for her. Good for her. All right. So there are 4 main topics in this module. There is production in the short run. There are costs in the short run. There is production in the long run. There are costs in the long run. Costs and production go together. Every cost function comes from a corresponding production function, period. That's just it. It's kind of like Emily and Amy. They go together all the time, right? Production and cost functions. That's just the way it is. Hey, everybody's famous for something, right, Amy? Okay. So, production in the short run. What's the big difference between the short run and the long run? Maggie, what'd you do to your arm?
I have like something wrong with my nerves in my hands, so I'm not.
You're too young for that.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so what's the big difference between the short run and the long run? Notice how I snuck that in there? Maggie, that was for you.
That's for me. What's the difference between the short run and the long run?
Yeah.
Like the amount of time, like before
Okay.
to check something.
Turns out that's true, but that's not the most important difference.
Wait, is it that in the short run, like inputs are fixed?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
In the short run, at least one input is fixed. And that's really important. Usually we think of capital as the fixed input. We think of the factory that you run your company out of, or the office building or something like that. Okay, the fact that we have fixed inputs is important because the fixed inputs give us the shapes of all the product curves and the shapes of all the cost curves. They come from the fixed factors of production. Okay, or to put it differently, a little more concisely, one of the things that you hopefully got out of the short run production story is the fact that diminishing marginal productivity is a thing. It happens, right? If you keep adding variable inputs, at some point you're going to get diminishing marginal productivity. The reason why we have diminishing marginal productivity is because if you keep adding workers, after a while there isn't enough capital for all the workers to use. So that's the problem. Fixed capital gives us diminishing marginal productivity of labor. Okay, now in the long run, there are no fixed factors. In the long run, everything is variable, and so you don't have diminishing returns. You don't have diminishing marginal productivity. Because if your operation, say, uses 2 workers for every one piece of equipment, in the long run, you just get more equipment. So you would use, if you needed 2 machines, you'd get 4 workers. If you needed 6 machines, sorry, if you needed 3 machines, you'd get 6 workers, right? In the long run, everything is variable. And so that has certain advantages. The first advantage is there's no diminishing returns. The second advantage is that costs in the long run are almost always less than costs in the short run. That's a little counterintuitive, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. Okay, now, something that Salid raised in her chapter analysis. We live in the short run. Businesses operate in the short run. They don't actually operate in the long run. The long run is kind of like the planning period. When we're thinking 1 year, 3 years, 5 years out. In that context, we can decide to have a much bigger factory or a much smaller factory. But while we're in the current factory, that's the short run that we're living in, and we're stuck in the factory there. Okay. Now, let me show you a few things. Let's look at some graphs, because graphs help to explain in ways that words do not. All right. Let me share my screen again. Share this one.
I didn't understand. Yeah. In this module.
Okay. So this is a graph that Pam sent me and said, and again, she was more diplomatic, what the heck are all those curves? Isn't that a good paraphrase, Pam? Okay. These are average cost and marginal cost curves, okay? The red one is the marginal cost curve. A marginal cost curve looks like a check mark or a Nike sign, okay? The green curve and the blue curve are average cost curves. Average cost curves look like smiley faces. Okay, they're upside down parabolas if you're a math geek. Okay, so this is the average total cost curve, the green one. This is the average variable cost curve, the blue one. They have similar shapes. They're not parallel, but they have similar shapes. They're both sort of U-shaped or smiley face shaped. Okay, the way you draw these curves, the way I draw these curves, is you start with the average total cost curve. You just draw a U-shape on your graph. You know, or I know at least, that the marginal cost curve intersects average cost at the minimum point of average cost, right here. So the check mark goes here and then shoots up above. If you think about it a slightly different way, if you draw an imaginary dotted line through the minimum point of the average cost curve, there's a left-hand side and a right-hand side. On the left-hand side, as you produce more output, your average cost is going down. In this part of the graph, it's always going to be true that the marginal cost is going to be less than the average cost. The marginal cost is going to be less than the average cost. What is literally happening here is the marginal cost is pulling the average down. Okay? So Amy, this one is for you. Imagine that you're taking the second exam and the grade you get on the second exam pulls your average down. How did you do on the second exam compared to your average?
Worse.
You did worse, right? Okay. So the second exam is your marginal grade. Because your marginal grade was less than your average grade, it's pulling your average down. Okay. On the right-hand side of the graph, it's the opposite. As you increase your output, your average is rising. marginal cost is above it, and marginal cost is pulling the average up. Okay, so the only place that they're equal is at the minimum point of the average cost, where for a moment, average cost is neither rising nor falling. Okay, now the same rules apply to average variable cost. Okay, we know that average variable cost is less than average total cost, so it has to be under it on the graph. Okay, what we also know, though I haven't said it yet, is what is the difference between those two cost concepts? If you take average total cost and you subtract average variable cost, what are you left with? Salita, are you trying to answer?
I mean, yeah, I am.
So what is it?
Is it the revenue?
No, revenue is totally separate from this.
Is it the fixed cost?
It is the fixed cost. It's the average fixed cost. Okay. What we know is that average fixed cost is really large at low levels of output. And so average total cost is really far above the average variable cost. But as you produce more and more and more and more, the average fixed cost decreases almost to zero. It approaches zero asymptotically. And as that happens, the average total cost and the average variable cost get very close together. And that's what's going on in this graph here. Okay, in business, that's known as spreading the overhead. The average fixed cost is the rent per unit of output. If you only produce 1 unit of output, the rent per unit of output is really big. If you produce 10 units of output, it's 1/10 of that. If you produce 100 units of output, it's 100th of that. If you produce 1,000 units of output, it's 1,000th of that. You're getting really close to zero here. That's spreading the overhead. Okay, so you draw the average total cost first, you draw the average variable cost second, you draw the marginal cost so that it intersects the average variable cost at its minimum point and the average total cost at its minimum point. And if you draw it as a check mark, it's going to work. Any questions about that? Let me see if anybody is looking like they have a question, but they're afraid to ask. I don't know why that would be, but it's worth looking. All right. Hey, Amethyst, is that you with your head chopped off? Yes, and that picture above. Okay, good. So, Margot, I won't even ask if you're understanding this because you're incognito tonight.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand.
Yes.
So the red check mark is marginal cost curve, right?
Correct.
Okay. And then the blue check mark is the average variable?
Correct. And the green check mark, the green U shape is the average total cost curve.
Is the average total cost curve. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Wait, I have a question.
Yes, Salib.
So is this graph representing a fixed period or long-term period?
Aha, very good question. So is this a short run graph or a long run graph?
Do whatever you want. It's already getting cold.
Short because you have fixed.
Correct. Because average variable cost is different from average total cost, there is an average fixed cost, even though it's not drawn on the graph. What I usually do, the average, if you here at 10, what I usually do is I just draw it on everything like this.
Can you mute the computer?
Yeah. Please mute your computer if you haven't, so that.
Amanda, can you mute your computer, please? Thank you.
Nope. Yeah, we don't need a party. I mean, you can have the party, just, anyway. Emily, you know what I mean. Okay. So to put it differently, average fixed cost doesn't really do anything for you. So more often than not, I don't even bother drawing it. If I was going to draw it, I would draw it down here like this. Okay, all the action takes place on this graph. Okay, in the long run, there is no variable cost, or I should say all the cost, all the total cost is variable cost. So you wouldn't have a blue line, you just have a green line. So that's a really good question, Salid. Other questions before we go on to the long run? All right. So let's jump to one of my favorite graphs here. I know, speaking as an economist, one of my favorite graphs. Also, hold on for 1 second. I have to mute myself. Hey, Kathy. Grace said that they're going to be here in 15 to 20 minutes, just FYI. Okay. Yeah, so if everything else wasn't exciting enough, we have guests coming from out of town tonight, and they're going to show up anytime now. So anyway, that's my excuse. You guys probably have your own excuses. Okay, let's jump to the long run graph. And that is not it. Where did the long run graph go? Shocking. All right, let me find it. Oh, no. By the way, these videos are pretty good if you want somebody to walk you through. No, here it is right there. Okay.
The AC/DC group ones are really good.
Yes. Yeah, that guy is a little crazy, but you have to be an economist. Okay. So what you should be seeing here is figure 3. It is a whole bunch of little SRACs. That's short run average cost. Okay. This is the same as, I think it was the blue line in the last graph. Let me just see, just make sure I'm doing this right. Back. Yeah, no, the green line. The green line is short run average cost. Okay. So here's my question for you. What determines the position of the average cost curve? Why is it here and not over here maybe? Do you understand the question even if you don't understand the answer? Do you understand the question? Mac, yes? You don't understand the question. Okay. Look at the quantity of oranges where the average cost curve hits bottom, hits its minimum point. It's right here. Why isn't the minimum point out here somewhere at a higher quantity, right? Why isn't the curve like here where I'm putting my cursor? That's the question that I'm asking. Okay, do you understand now, Mac?
Yes.
Okay, good. The answer is the position of the cost curves depends on how much capital the business has, how much capital stock. Think of it as the size of your factory. With a bigger factory, your average cost curve is going to be further to the right because it's going to allow you to produce a higher quantity of oranges or whatever your product is before you hit the bottom point. Okay, this point, by the way, is a really important point, this quantity right here, because it's the cheapest that you can produce your product. Okay, so let's jump back to the other graph here. What we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different short run average cost curves, each one corresponding to a different size factory. Okay, so SRAC3, that's the medium-sized factory. SRAC4, that's medium-large. SRAC2, that's medium-small. SRAC1, that's small. SRAC5, that's large, right? So literally, as you increase your capital stock, you shift to the right. All of your cost curves shift to the right. Or really what you're doing is you're jumping to a new set of cost curves. Okay, now look what's happening here. suppose you're at SRAC3. This is your factory size. You thought demand was going to be Q3. Okay, so the process that you went through is you did some market research and you said how much output do we think we're going to get? And the answer that you came up with was Q3. So you built the factory, or you rented the factory that would optimize your cost of producing that quantity. In other words, if you're right, you're going to be producing your output at the lowest possible average cost. What is true about most predictions, most forecasts, especially in business? Think about the weather. The answer is they're not completely right. If you're lucky, you're close. Okay. Pam, think about budgets, right? Ex ante versus ex post. You want to be close. Okay. So let's suppose that demand is higher than you expected. So instead of producing this quantity, you're actually producing here. What does that mean with respect to your average cost? How is your average cost going to be at this quantity compared to Q3? If you go up to your average cost curve, you can see that your average cost is actually higher because you're producing a larger quantity than your factory was ideally designed for. Okay. Now, as demand grows, and I'm assuming that it does.
Now that would be true if you were, can you see me pointing?
No, I can't, sorry.
But that would be true if you were producing less than what your company
would be over here.
You would still be higher, but it would just
absolutely.
Be okay.
This is the Goldilocks problem.
Okay.
Amethyst, does that make sense to you? Got it. Okay. Now, notice that you can produce any quantity of output with different size factories. Okay. If you were here, you could produce with your middle-sized factory, but you could also produce with your medium-large size factory if you just extended the lines. You could even produce with your super large factory, but the average cost would be astronomical because you're not producing enough to be efficient in that factory, right? So let's suppose you expected to be producing Q3, but you end up producing about this quantity right here. In the short run, you're stuck with the factory that you have the lease on. In the long run, what can you do? Margot, this is your chance to prove that you're here. Or anybody. What would you do in the long run? If you needed to produce this quantity and you stay in your medium-sized factory, your average cost is going to be up here somewhere. But you can do better than that.
Get a new factory?
You could move to the medium-large factory, this factory. So instead of producing up here at this high average cost, you could lower your average cost and operate at in the larger factory. So that's what businesses want to do in the long run. In the short run, they're stuck with the factory that they have. In the long run, they can choose the right size factory, or at least a better size factory. All right. What is the best size factory there is?
The one that fits your needs?
The one whose minimum point hits bottom at the quantity that you need to produce. Okay? And that gets back to the point that I made earlier about long run costs. The long run average cost curve is literally the minimum point of all the short run average cost curves. Okay? So you could actually, there is a factory that would have its minimum point right here, and the average cost curve would look something like this, and it would just touch the long run average cost curve at that point. Okay. Notice though that given the factory that you're in, the short run curve is probably above the long run curve. The best you can possibly do is have the short run curve just equal to the long run curve. And so the general rule about costs is that long run costs are less than or equal to short run costs. Okay, probably less than, but could be equal to if you have exactly the right size factory. All right, any questions about that? It's a lot to take in, I know. That's why we have the video, so you can watch it over again.
So each of those each of those like little graphs represents a short run period, right?
Yes.
Like for example, if you were in the lease for 5 years, then you might be at S or AC, and then but once you start the lease again, you add the second one.
Well, you're at whichever one you move to. You
Okay.
could jump to the third one if your demand is really high there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Dr. Greenlaw, I have to take a call from the school.
Darn, we're almost done.
Back. Maybe it'll be a quick question.
Okay, good. All right, other questions? If you have them later, you can always email me. Oh, crud. What? Did you pull my beer out of the freezer? Okay, last point. There is this thing called economies of scale. Okay? Economies of scale is a good thing. What it means is that as you move to a bigger factory, you don't just shift to the right, you also shift down. So by moving to a bigger factory, you lower your average costs, but you lower them twice. You lower them first because you have the right size factory, and you lower them, here's the first part, when you equal the minimum point here on the SRAC1 curve. And the second reason is because your overall costs are going to be lower than that. That's what economies of scale means. The way we define it is if you increase your scale of production, if you increase your output, and your long run average costs go down, that's what we mean by economies of scale. So decreasing long run average cost as you increase your quantity.
Then what happens with number 5, how it goes back up?
Okay. So every industry has a long run average cost curve that looks like this. Some of them are tighter, some of them are wider bowls. Okay. At some point you reach the bottom of the long run average cost curve. Here it's called constant returns to scale. What it means is you move to a bigger factory, you move to another bigger factory, you move to another bigger factory, and your average costs stay the same. So it's constant there. At some point, it's possible that your factories are too large to manage properly, so that as you move to a bigger factory, even though you're doing the best you can, you're raising your average costs. That's called diseconomies of scale. And you do not want to be there. Most companies can find a way to avoid that. Okay, for example, if the problem is the factory is literally so large that the boss can't manage all the employees, then the solution is maybe to split it into 2 smaller factories, each of which has their own boss, right? So what I like to think of is the long run average cost curve has a decreasing part, that's economies of scale, and it has a flat part, that's constant returns to scale. It may not effectively have a diseconomies of scale part if companies can figure out how to avoid that. Okay, or to put it differently, economies of scale is by definition a long run thing. There is no such thing as economies of scale in the short run. All right, any questions? Hey, Hannah, glad you could come back. Any questions? Morgan's asleep. All right, if there are no questions, then I'm going to get ready for my company. And I will see you guys next week. If you run into questions in the meantime, just shoot me an email. If there's something you want to work through, we can set up a one-on-one hangout like this, just the 2 of us, and I can work you through it with the graphs and stuff. So just let me know. All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.